this morning and this evening, you probably figured out that I didn't mention the 7 letters this morning. Well, I'm going to do it tonight. I decided that I could spend less time talking about violence and the temptation to worship the beast, and I want to spend a little bit more time on the letters to the 7 churches. The specifics of these individual situations are really hard to sift out from the stock indictments that the seer says that Jesus makes against each church. You remember I started last night by saying that we get the best access to what's going on through the window of chapter 13 and the 2 beasts. The next best access, I think, that we get to who these people are is from these 7 letters. But it's a bit of a stretch because in some ways they look a lot alike. If you read straight through chapters 2 and 3, each of the letters starts the same, they tend to end the same, and people get praised for various things, but also chided for various things. Each one starts with Jesus addressing the angel of the church and saying what Jesus knows about the church. That kind of reinforcement of the picture of God's sovereignty that's granted to Jesus, who knows what's going on in the churches, means that when John addresses his exhortation, we call that paranesis, the moral exhortation of the letter, he does it with the very authority of Jesus, who's acting on God's authority. All of the 7 letters, except those to Sardis and Laodicea, actually praise something that's going on there. Generally, their faithfulness in the midst of troubled times, but all of them call for repentance and amendment of life. And almost all the issues, I think, are related, and they have to do with how one lives in a world of empire. The first recurring issue is the danger of falling away from the faith. The second one is the danger of wealth and possessions. We don't often think of that as a danger, but the Bible does repeatedly. And the third one is the danger of some kind of false teaching. And I want to look at those 3 with you for a few minutes. All right, the first danger, there it is the danger of falling away from the faith. That's a very familiar danger to not only Christians who are experiencing persecution, but for everyone for whom the lure of alternatives is close at hand. Sometimes it's just easier to capitulate to the hugeness of the culture around you than it is to stay faithful to Jesus. I think North American Christians don't experience much of that, and it requires us to act imaginatively, to listen to the experience of other people. We're not very often likely to lose our jobs or get harassed because we're Christians. But we've known people who have been. I remember a Christian man I met in Rostock, which was then in East Germany, in 1976. He was a scientist, a chemist, and he'd been part of a team, are you ready, that invented styrofoam. Now, you never thought about this, but somebody actually had to invent styrofoam. It's ubiquitous. It didn't used to exist, though. And he was a really incredibly charming man. And he was forbidden to go to any scientific conferences outside his own country. And his 2 very bright children were forbidden to go to university because he was a Christian. Protestant Christians today in some parts of Mexico continue to experience social ostracism, and even violence from the majority culture that considers them outsiders and a danger. Some Christians in China who refuse to abide by the government's religion requirements are jailed and harassed. But even, in the land of freedom of worship, sometimes we also experience cultural hostility. My church is across the street from the state capitol in Georgia, and my children and their youth group were once screamed at by an angry crowd when they stood in front of our church building to mourn the execution of a prisoner on death row. These are young people, middle school and high school age children, who were as upset by that hostility from the crowd as they had been by the execution. Some people in our own denomination demonize each other because of what they believe the gospel calls them to be and to do, which suggests to me that the dark side of faithfulness is its distortion. And I think that comes back in the third recurrent issue in these 7 letters. So when we think about the danger of giving in to hostile responses to Christian life, we don't have to think only about people in other parts of the world. It can even be close to home. The seer says, "You've abandoned the love you had at first." That suggests a different kind of falling away from the faith, a kind of weariness with good works and a weariness with faithfulness. To Sardis, he says, "You have a name of being alive, but you are dead." That also suggests a weariness that may be more familiar to us than we'd like to admit. At times when the work has been hard and you've been faithful beyond your own endurance and the fruits don't seem to be many, then the temptation is, as the seer says, to have a reputation of being alive, of being close to death. There it is. And to Laodicea, the really frightening letter, the one the seer saves for last. "You are neither cold nor hot, but lukewarm." I can imagine a number of scenarios that might cause us to become lukewarm when the devotion to the work has become too wearying, or when hostility has been so persistent that it's easier to take a quiet role, to take a back seat. That seems to be what's going on, at least partly, in Laodicea. All right, the next danger that recurs throughout these letters is the danger of wealth and possessions. And this is something that's throughout the Revelation